And welcome to the show, Al Islam and Community Issues. My name is Naeem Sharif, and today we have part of the Seattle Black Panther Party Legacy Committee. Over to my left is Brother Gary Owens, to my far left, Vanetta Molson, and to my far left is Brother Benjamin Shabazz. We thank you for tuning in today. We have a lot of information to cover. One of the first things we want to do, and then we'll introduce our guests and how they became part of the Black Panther Party, is to show some of the symbols of where the symbol of the Black Panther came from. And I see Vanetta has her sweatshirt on. But let's go back to this one symbol. We want to show the first picture. And this first picture coming up will be of the 761st Tank Battalion, and it was an African American tank unit, and this was in World War II. So if we could put that particular picture up, if all the technical things go right, and there is a picture of, right there, of the tank battalion. So this, of course, back in World War II, a lot of the Army was segregated. So this shows you the picture of the tank battalion there. And one of the famous members of this tank battalion was First Lieutenant Jackie Robinson, the baseball player. Quick story on that. Robinson didn't go over to Europe to serve because when he was on the bus, when they were doing training, they were told him to get in the back of the bus, and he wouldn't, so he refused, and they wanted to court-martial him. But Robinson was eventually acquitted of all charges. But let's go to the next slide on that. So we got the next slide coming up. Okay, that was out of order. So the next slide should be of a guy who was on the tanker there, and it's a picture of African American, and he has, I think, some binoculars on there, so maybe we can get that picture up. If not, we'll just go with the flow. Okay. Alrighty, so let's see if we can get that picture. There we go. So this is a picture of one of the people who was a tanker. So you can see him in his uniform, tank behind him, and then there is a patch or the motto. So let's go to the next slide, and it shows the logo of the 761st Tank Battalion. Let's show that logo. There it is, and their motto was "Come Out Fighting." So there you go, the little history of the Panther logo. Let's go to the next slide and show you a more up-to-date logo of the Black Panther, and we'll get that logo up there for you. And this will be the logo of the Black Panther. So this was originally, I think, through SNCC, and they were doing stuff in Lowndes County. And as you know, the Black Panther Party was a political party, just like the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So the Democratic Party, their logo was the donkey, or is the donkey. The Republican Party logo is the elephant, and the Black Panther Party borrowed this from SNCC, and it was the Black Panther Party logo. Okay, so just a little background on the logos, a little history on that. So let's just go into it. Gary, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, why you became part of the Black Panther Party, and if you would tell your story about your father when you guys were at a football game at Husky Stadium, if that's not too painful. It might be too painful for you, but
No.
I think it's a good story.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here and with my colleague, Vanetta.
Okay.
And my story is, like many stories, it deals with some of the realities of being black in America. I was born and raised in Seattle. My mother's family came from Eastern Washington. I was born to a 16-year-old black woman, a 19-year-old black man. At birth, my father abandoned me, but my mother met Sylvester Owens when I was very young, and that's how I became Gary Owens. We lived mostly in a form of segregated housing in Seattle. We lived in the International District. We lived in Rainier Vista, Holly Park, and we lived on Beacon Hill. When I was maybe 8 or 9, my dad was a seaman at the time, and he came home and he wanted to do something special. So he took me to a University of Washington football game because we both liked football. And we were sitting up at the top of the stadium, great view. I remember they were playing the University of Colorado, and he asked me if I would like something to eat, and I said yes. So he went to get something to eat, and when he came back, he and on the right behind us were police officers, state officers, and they wore these funny-looking hats. So he stumbled, and they said, the exact term I'll never forget, they said, "That nigga's drunk." So all of a sudden, 4 or 5 of them jumped him, the food went everywhere, and they drug him off. I was 9 years old, so I'm crying, and my dad, and so on and so forth. So I didn't see him for another 2 days. A white woman took me outside, and I remembered my phone number, and so they called my mother. My mother took a cab down there, took me to my grandmother's house, and then she went to the jail to get my dad out of jail. The trauma for me was I ended up going to the University of Washington for college, but I never went to a football game. I was traumatized like that. The notion is that different places that I lived, there weren't incidents like that. Living in the projects were, of course, integrated. So you had all kinds of people there, black, white, Native American, whatever, Asian. I think that stayed with me for a long time in terms of having me an understanding that the things that they told us about the South might have been true, but it stayed with me till I actually went to the South to know that I lived in what people call up South. Up South, this meant that the things that happened in the South also happened in a place like Seattle that had this characterization of being very liberal and fair and all that kind of stuff. But my point of view was after growing up there that wasn't true.
Yeah, that is something. Vanetta, tell us a little bit about you and your journeys.
Oh, I moved around like Gary.
And you guys can speak up a little bit more. Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah.
I moved around like Gary from the projects to the CD, to the projects to the CD. My dad moved us a lot. When I was a child, I went to 7 elementary schools. And I knew about poverty. I lived, sugar sandwiches and syrup sandwiches. Yeah, I mean, really.
You ever have the mayo sandwich?
Oh,
just
that
mayo.
Was good. It was not fun, but it was doable. We were alive and playing when we got out from school, and we did all right. I was telling someone the other day that when I lived in the projects, I thought I was definitely a middle-class person, my family, because everybody I knew was in the projects, and the teacher said most Americans are middle class.
I see.
Yeah, sure. I had it right.
Very good.
So, but then I went to the South, and I with the Urban League, when I was 17, and there was so much sadness with the poverty in this community was just outside the city limits, so they weren't getting any resources from the city.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sanitation stuff, and it was a mess. Well, not a mess, but it was sad, and they were getting ready to bus the kids to white schools under the segregation law. So this was in the 60s, and I hated that. I came back here before I started working with the party, I was going door to door, saying we don't want busing, we don't want busing.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's just a disaster. I mean, it didn't turn out as bad as it could have, but it was, I thought it was awful. Anyway, I joined the party to change things.
To change things.
Mhm.
Okay. Brother Benjamin, did you have some questions or comments you wanted to make?
Well, I just had a few. I was just curious about the term, the Black Panther Party. You talked about it came from those roots,
Mhm.
the Army, and then it grew into another term,
Right.
and then so that's where you guys actually got it from.
Got it from SNCC, from Student Nonviolent
Yeah.
Coordinator Committee. Stokely Carmichael, Julian Bond, all those kind of folks were part of SNCC. And they were registering people down in Lowndes County. And the symbol that they used was the Black Panther because it was a political party. And it's like we already mentioned about, Democrats and Republicans, they had a symbol. From what I understand, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale asked them if they could use that symbol, and I guess it was okay, and that was the symbol that the Black Panther Party used, so that's where that came from.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's just show a picture of, and then we can get into a picture of Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, and these were the co-founders of the Black Panther Party, which originated in Oakland, California in 1966. So there is Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton. And it was really called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And one of the first programs of the Black Panther Party was police patrol. And the reason for that, because people were getting brutalized, just like they're still getting brutalized today. So and Gary and Vanetta, feel free to just jump in on this. What happened one time was about the Panthers in Oakland were patrolling the police, and because people were getting brutalized. So one day they were patrolling the police, and the police stopped this one guy. So about 6 Panthers jumped out the car and were observing the police, and the police officer said, what are you niggers, doing? You can't be doing this. So then Huey P. Newton, who was a law student, pulled out his law book, said under the code, California Code 1965, blah, 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 we can observe you of, doing your duty as long as we're so many feet. And I think that it was 25 feet. You would say we're 50 feet. And the officer said, well, you niggas, blah, 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 you gotta go. You can't, we're not having this. And so he said, he repeated the statute, the regulation. And so the police officer wasn't really having that. So then the Panthers just said, on their gun, and then it was on. So the police officer, kind of I think he called back up or whatever, but then he just went on about his business because there was just too many Panthers. So this went all over Oakland and the neighborhood because people were coming out to clubs and everything and so forth. And it got over, the community heard about it. Then the West Coast heard about it, the nation heard. This went around the world. That a group of black men were patrolling the police. So that was the aim, just to patrol them so they wouldn't brutalize our people. And, we did that here in Seattle and around the country. But that was just, I don't know if something you want to add to that, Gary?
Well, only that my understanding is that in Seattle, since we were the first chapter to be outside of California, it was Oakland, Los Angeles, and then us, that when some folks from Seattle went to a Black Panther, Black Student Union conference in Oakland, that's where they met Huey and Bobby Seale, and they asked, basically, could we start a party up in Seattle? And they said yes. So I think Bobby came up, and that was the beginning. But it's interesting because when people thought of Seattle a lot, they thought it was a kind of a genteel place, that it was not like the South. But in reality, those of us that grew there, knew that even if we hadn't been to the South, we know it was like up South. That we had the same kind of integration, we had the same kind of animosity, we had deprivation of the truth in school about where we really came from. Later on we found out that we came from kings and queens and majestic societies in Africa that were very well renowned and all that, but that was never part of our instruction in school. The fact that every time if you open up a textbook, it always showed us we were picking cotton or doing something very not dignified. Mm-hmm. So I think part of the notion was that the party began to understand, or had already understood, that to do something positive for the community was going to raise their self-esteem, to make them understand that they were valuable in so many different ways from birth. Not you had to do anything. The fact that when you were born and came out of your mother's womb, that you were already a dignified person with a serious, serious history. And a lot of us that went to public school or private school, we didn't get that information. The only information that we might get would be from relatives who were born and raised in the South or raised someplace where they kind of knew the stories. They knew people who were successful. They knew the hard work that people had to do, but also they knew the caution of being too far out there, that people feel that you're embarrassing them because you're not staying in your place. And I was raised to think that anything was possible. And so most of the schools I went to, of course, were mostly, where I lived, were mostly white. And I'll just take one quick story, is that when I was in the fourth grade, the teacher asked, I was on Beacon Hill, they asked, what do you want to be? Went around, they got to me. I said, I would like to be a doctor. And my teacher said, what? He says, you want to be a what? And I said, a doctor. He fell on the floor and laughed for 5 minutes. Laugh. Made me cry. I cried, and made all the students laugh at me. And then when he finished, he said, now, Gary, I'm going to ask you again, but I want you to give me a real answer. What do you want to be? And I wouldn't answer. So he sent me to the office. And they sent a note home with my parents saying that I was not being cooperative at school. But I only tell that story because I realize that I'm sure in some form or fashion that still happens, where we're being degraded, our kids are being degraded in so many different ways, and there's so many different things that they say we can do. But it seems to be a form of entertainment. We're in sports, we're doing music, we're doing all this other stuff. But if I took you downtown to Seattle right now, we have a construction boom. You'd be lucky to find any black men or women doing anything but flagging. If that. But that's the lowest ladder on the compensation scale. You don't see any black men, and we have building more buildings than any city in the country, but we don't have people like us doing that work, men or women.
So true. And then looking at the tech jobs, you don't see us in the tech jobs.
That holds either.
I'll be downtown, I see everybody else, and I say, wow. If I might see a couple, and it is something.
No, it's been segregated.
Yeah, it really has.
I want to say something about the symbol and our fine brothers and standing guard and protecting the community is that, and the Panther. It's pride. It's not just pride. It's power. It's power. We're pretty powerless in our neighborhoods. We can do harm to each other. We can, when we riot, we can do a little more damage, but power, real power, that would protect us, that would allow us to live a decent life, that's what it represented.
Let's show another, the next slide on there, and it should be, I'll try to get to those 2 slides. So let's go to the next one. This one should be of a rally. Yeah, so he says, so Huey P. Newton, one of the things, he got stopped by the police about 50 times.
At least.
And you say at least. And so then there happened to be a shootout where a police officer got killed and so forth and so on. But this year, this rally says, try police, not Huey. And we see that today, even today, with Black Lives Matter. You know, unarmed African-American, brown and black people were getting killed and nothing is done. And, you know, the police are not held accountable. So that was one of the things to try to hold the police accountable. And what they've done with Black Lives Matter, they tried to make them like they're the bad person because they're bringing this up, you know. Because then they say, well, blue lives matter. Well, blue lives always matter. And then they go say, well, all lives matter. Yeah, all lives matter. But where was all lives matter in the year 1619?
That's right.
Where was all lives matter? So this was some of the things that the party had to do. Let's show one more, the next one, and then we'll get into some of the survival programs if we have time. So we'll show one more slide here. And then this was in the Capitol in Olympia, Washington. And there is Anthony Ware, Brother Clark, Wayne Jenkins, Elmer Dixon, Steve Phillips, and that's myself there at the end. So we were there, and it's interesting that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, they wanted gun control when they saw this. And the question is, the obvious question is why? But they wanted gun control. So we were outside there and protesting. Inside, Aaron Dixon was talking to the legislator there because they were trying to pass what was called the Milford Act. So you couldn't open carry. And one of the reasons why they didn't want the Panthers to open carry, because when we patrolled the police, we had our weapons and it was open carry. So that was one of the main reasons. But like I said, the NRA, they wanted gun control then. So there's another story to that. Maybe one day we'll get into that. But there's another story to that, and we'll maybe do that another time. Let's show the next slide and get into some of what is called the survival programs of the Black Panther Party. And there were several things. There was the free breakfast program, free medical clinic. What else, Gary? Vanetta?
Busing to prisons.
Busing the prisons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clothing.
Clothing, free clothing. Mm-hmm. There was a program, and I don't have my notes here, called SAFE. It was for seniors. I can't remember what the acronym stands for. But basically, what the Panther members would take the elderly people to the bank or to the store or for doctor's visits.
Runs that
Yeah.
they have. Because transportation is always a problem in the cities.
Yeah, yeah.
And outside.
Yeah. So let's show the next slide, and it should be a bigger picture of the free breakfast program.
I think the other part that we also did, we tried to help kids learn outside of the traditional school system. So we had something that we call liberation schools.
Yeah, speak up just a little bit more.
They were liberation schools, and they were schools in which we tried to tell young people the truth about where they came from, what the contributions they had made, and so on and so forth, because the general story that we heard is that we picked cotton, we did all the menial things. We really didn't do anything to really build the success of America. But that turned out to be not true. Everywhere we have been on the planet, we were an asset to that country or that place or whatever. And I think that, so not just black kids would miss out on this information, anybody else from a different race or different culture didn't get that information either. Maybe the most damaging thing is, I have a strong belief, I mean we did, that people knew that the administration knew that, the teachers knew that, but they didn't want the students to know that, because that's a sense of empowerment, to know, and it raises your self-esteem, to know that there's something you could do or should do or might do that is really significant. But if you're told that you're not about anything, low self-esteem stagnates your development, because then you do things that maybe you shouldn't do, because you don't know that there's really another pathway you could be taking to empower yourself and your community.
Exactly. Okay, well, very good. We have some other grounds to cover. We need to talk about the Carolyn Downs Medical Center. We need to talk about some other people who were the women of the Black Panther Party. People who helped the party, you would be surprised who helped. So we'll try to do a part 2 of that. Then let's see, yeah. So there are about 4 or 5 different other things that we need to get into, and definitely, Vanetta, you being in the nursing field and everything, we want you to talk a lot about, the medical center and everything. Benjamin, we have like maybe a minute. I will say 30 seconds. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm excited about part 2 coming up. But I wanted to pinpoint on what you were talking about, how you were treated in that football stadium. They had no concern about how you felt about it, how even you were going to get home.
Yeah, because his dad fell, and so they thought he was drunk. Somebody said he was drunk.
That nigga is drunk.
That nigga is drunk.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we thank you for listening. We'll do a part 2 of this and go into a little bit deeper. Thank you very much for watching, and peace and prayers.